Okay, we'll make a start then on understanding the mission to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I thought I'd start by introducing myself. Who am I and why am I here? Maybe we can figure that out together. But my name is Mike Thomas. As I said on the stage earlier on, I'm a counties evangelist. If you don't know what Counties is, it's 150 years old, an organisation based in England and Wales, looking to have evangelists based in every county throughout England and Wales. Do a brilliant project resourcing churches to keep evangelism hot and to proclaim the name of Jesus. So I've been with Counties for almost 20 years now. Started when I was 5. And that was terrible joke to start. But yes, I'm a church leader in Rumney Chapel. So Rumney is in East Cardiff, based in a bit of an area that's affected by poverty and deprivation. So lived there for 28 years, and on the leadership team there, particularly looking at like community outreach, children's and youth ministry, that kind of thing. I'm the Growing Youth Ministry Course Director. I didn't come up with that title, but that's what I do. So GYM, GYM, Growing Youth Ministry, is the new resource from Wales Leadership Forum, resourcing not just kind of full-time youth pastors, because I don't think many of our churches have those, do they? Although we'd like to see more churches that do have them, but also volunteer youth workers as well. So particularly looking at gospel-focused youth ministry across Wales. So we're starting our course in January, and we would love people to sign up for that, whether it's your whole youth workers team or just one or two from your churches. It's going to be a fantastic resource, bringing in knowledge and skills from lots of different kind of churches and youth workers and ministries across Wales, looking at all sorts of different things, from developing a vision to mental health and young people, schools work. It's a really broad course, so do speak to me afterwards if you're interested in that. I'm also the director of Spree Wales. If you don't know what Spree is, you should. Spree is the largest children's and youth festival, camping weekend, camp, whatever you want to call it, in Wales. We've been going 20 years next year. This year we had 623 children and young people camping in Carmarthen for the weekend during the heat wave. That was fun. And yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. Founder of Faith Space, a local schools ministry in East Cardiff, and a father of 4 Gen Zers or Gen Zers, because every time I say Gen Z, my children make fun of me, despite it not being properly British English if I say Gen Z. But there we go. That's the culture that we live in, isn't it? So we are looking today at understanding Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I thought we'd start with this. Here are some quotes about the youth of today. I don't know if you can all see them, and found these on the internet, and they are from different periods in history, okay, and from the last 2,000 years, believe it or not. These are actual quotes that have been in the press, that they've been in history books, and so on. And I thought it was really interesting. I hear it said quite often, and I read it quite often in the press, you know, kind of our attitudes as older people towards young people or the youth of today. It's almost like that title that we give troublemakers, isn't it? You know, oh, the youth, they're doing this, they're doing that. Certainly we've had a few incidences where the police actually have come to our church recently and gone, oh, the youth are causing problems. And I've pushed back and gone, actually, it's not them. And I've been right and the police have been wrong. So yeah, it's interesting where these are from. I've got the dates here of these. I love some of these quotes. 1 BC, the bearded youth does not foresee what is useful, and squandering his money That, I mean, apart from the language that's used, that phrase could be said about young people today, isn't it? You know, they're buying avocados instead of paying the rent. They're not, by the way. Just that's something I read recently. The morals of children are tenfold worse than formerly, from 1843. And if that was true in 1843, goodness knows where we're at now in 2025. And what was the one at the bottom right-hand side here? I was like reading this one out. Youth were never more saucy. Never more savagely saucy. I'm not quite sure what being savagely saucy is, to be honest. The ancient are scorned, honourable are condemned. Actually, that's what it should say. The magistrate is not dreaded. 1624. So our attitudes to young people as society, I think that's where we need to start. They've been negative towards young people. I don't get it, because we were all young once. Me, not quite so long ago. Some of you a little bit more than that. But yeah, our attitudes towards young people are really important, aren't we? So how do we have the right attitude towards these Gen Zers and Gen Alphas? That's something that we're going to look at today. But before we do that, I'm going to take you back to Christmas 1988. And here I have an actual photo of my Christmas present, from Christmas 1998. Don't know if you, sorry? I don't still have it now. I've still got the photo, because that was what I took on Christmas Day morning, actually. And this was what I had. I'd asked Father Christmas, right, for this present, I don't know for how many months, because I loved listening to the radio. But there was this girl in school that I really wanted to make a mixtape for, and I only had a single cassette. Now, some of you who are younger going, I don't understand the significance of this. It's a double cassette player, guys. It means you can record something from the radio and then record from cassette to cassette, and you can make a mixtape for the person that you love. And Sarah really, really wanted my mixtape. Well, she didn't, actually. That's another story. I was obsessed with listening to the radio, and Tiffany, I think we're alone now. Shall I sing it? No, I won't. No, there's a few fans here. We're singing it in our heads as I speak. But this was, for me, like the highlight of my Christmas in 1988 when I was 11 years old. Okay, I'm 48. And it was brilliant. Although, actually, what happened about half an hour after I had it, I went upstairs to go and record something, and I put the aerial up. Remember, the aerials were about 2 meters long, weren't they? And I was twisting it round, and I snapped the aerial off about half an hour after I got it. But anyway, that was my Christmas in 1988. I told this story to my children as I was preparing for today, and they were like, Dad, what on earth is a cassette player? My youngest daughter is 13 years old, and she was like, I don't understand why you're talking about this. Like, why didn't you just go on the internet and download the song? I was like, the internet didn't exist, Katie. But it just blew their mind, wait until I tell them there was no such thing as mobile phones back then as well. The experiences that we had, whether you're my age as a 48-year-old, whether you're younger or older, the experiences that we had growing up are vastly, vastly different today than what they were when we were young. I was just talking actually to Gavin just before this, and we were saying, it wasn't a thing when we were young. We didn't label ourselves as Gen X or Boomers or the Silent Generation or Gen Z or whatever it is. But these days, that's the label, isn't it? My daughter is very pleased that she's not Gen Alpha and she's only just Gen Z. Imagine being Generation Beta when that comes around. The Alphas are going to have a field day with that, aren't they? You're second, we're first. But this is what we do these days, isn't it? We kind of split everybody up into these generations. And I don't know where you're. I like to call myself a Zillennial. Okay, I'm in between Gen X and Millennial because I'm Peter Pan. And all of those experiences that all of those different generations had growing up are very different from each other because society has changed so much. If I got out my what do we call it, my double cassette player. It would be a bit of a history lesson, wouldn't it, for children these days, rather than them thinking, wow, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Let me show you my Bluetooth speaker. So these are the generations. So who are Generation Z and who are Generation Alpha? Well, let's just quickly do a little bit of kind of background really about who these are. So Gen Z, born between 1997 2012. You probably heard of the phrase digital natives. Okay, so they've grown up. The internet has always been around. Mobile phones have always been around. Social media has always been a thing for them. They don't know a time when these digital things didn't exist. They have instant access to information. So when I was a kid, if we wanted to find something out, we'd have to look in encyclopedias or ask wise people about what was going on. But these days, it's just a Google away, isn't it? Technology for Gen Zers or Gen Zers, sorry, is just instant. It's part of their first language. Okay, so that's really important that we remember that they respond well to digital things. They're socially conscious, activist-minded. They're passionate about things like climate change, racial justice, mental health, and gender equality. And they expect institutions like the church to care about those things too. So unless we have an opinion about it, they'll be like, oh, why aren't you thinking about these things? They're so important to me. So what does the church think about them as well? Mental health aware. My two youngest children particularly suffer with anxiety around school and education and so on. But there's so much of that around, isn't there? When I was a kid, if you were feeling down or you were feeling depressed, it was just like, oh, come on, chin up, get on with it, boys, don't cry, and all of that kind of thing. Whereas these days, actually, importantly, I think, there's open conversations about anxiety, about depression, about self-care. Those things are far more normalized than what they used to be. And Gen Z values emotional vulnerability and peer support as well. I love the way that my daughters and their friends support and care for each other. Gen Z are relational, community orientated. Despite being labeled as screen addicted, they're always addicted to their screens. Actually, I'm glad my dad's not here today. He is here, but he's not in the... Oh, it's been recorded. Sorry, Dad. But, whenever my dad comes to my house, he's always like on his phone, ping, ping, ping. He's 74, my dad. And he's worse than a teenager. It's that attitude, isn't it, towards young people. We go, oh, they're always on their phones. But we're the same, actually, aren't we? No matter what generation that we are from, there's always people who are addicted to their phones and not. But generally, we kind of say about Gen Z, don't we? They are addicted to their phones. But actually, they desire deep relationships, safe spaces where they're seen and where they're known. Gen Z are skeptical but open-minded. They tend to be cautious of authority. And so, that affects us, doesn't it, in our ministry, in our churches. If they don't trust authority, if they don't trust mass media, like my kids, if they're going to look at the news, they won't go to bbc.co.uk/news like I do. They'll go on TikTok or Instagram. And not realizing sometimes, actually, that's really biased. Mass media, is biased, isn't it? But they're looking at influencers and people like that to get their news and their updates and their worldview from. But they are open to authenticity. They can tell if we are not being true, if we're not being real. And personal connections are really, really important to that. They've got short attention spans, but high information processing. They've got that constant stream of content. I just said at the beginning, wasn't it? They are digital natives. They're used to having their phone on and watching TV at the same time. It drives me insane when my children do that. Honestly, I'm like, just focus on one thing at a time. And they're like, we are. It's okay. I've got my phone open and I'm watching a film and I can do both of those things because they've got the ability to filter information quickly. I sit down and if I'm focused on something and somebody speaks to me, I jump because I'm like, no, I just need to do one thing at a time. But I find with my children, they've got that really weird ability to be able to do two things, and they still have that depth of engagement in that as well. And then lastly, spiritually curious but institutionally detached. They're open to spiritual conversations. We've got some quotes later on from some brilliant research actually that Scripture Union have done, and Rian is here, you can speak to her about it afterwards. But some brilliant things about kind of they're spiritually curious. There's a quote later on that says, well, of course I believe in God, everybody does. You know, it's from an 11-year-old child in a school. But they are wary or even distrustful of organized religion and so on, but they are hungry for meaning, for hope, and for belonging. So that's Gen Z, that's 1997 to 2012. But beyond that then, we've also got Generation Alpha. So 2013 to the 2020s, they're still emerging. There's some kind of discussion over when Generation Beta starts and Generation Alpha finishes. So not only are Generation Alpha digital natives, somebody has labeled them actually as tech embedded from birth. So like, I remember my daughter Katie, again, she was very young. We were down the church and we were having a bit of a sort out, and I found a leaflet from when the extension in my church was built. It was 1964, and it was printed on, not even on a photocopy. It was one of those machines. Remember the ones you had to crank? And anyway, if you don't remember, don't worry about it. And there was a lovely kind of line drawn picture of my church on the front, and she picked up and she went, "Oh, is this our church?" And she grabbed it like this and tried to zoom in on the picture. And you know, she was only kind of 5 years old or something like that, and she was trying to, and then she went, "Oh no, silly me, I can't do that." And we all laughed at her, and we still do. But she's tech embedded. She just knew from a young age, actually, you know, I knew how to do this. And you find kind of younger children actually even more so, you know, right the way from birth. They're learning about these things in school, at home, you know. You find kind of 4-year-olds with iPads. I don't even have an iPad. But they're growing up with smartphones and tablets and smart speakers. I've got a lady in my church, Marie, and her son, and he loves chatting to Alexa. And he'll sing along to Alexa, and he'll play games with Alexa as if Alexa is his friend. And of course, that kind of stresses me out. I'm like, oh, but you know, all of this influence from AI. But AI is normal for them. It's just part of their life, whereas AI blows my mind about what it can do and what it can't do and all of that kind of stuff. Actually, for them, it's just part of ordinary life, and they can swipe often before they can speak clearly. So AI natives, that's also what they are. They're not just digitally native, they're deeply shaped by AI and tools like ChatGPT, if you use that at all, or learning apps and smart assistants, that kind of thing. They're visual learners. And I'm not a visual learner. I can't watch something or watch a video and learn from that. I have to write things down. Obviously, we've all got different learning styles, haven't we? But you'll find that the majority of Gen Alpha are visual learners because they've been brought up on YouTube or TikTok or interactive apps, and they respond really well to visuals and video and gamified learning and hands-on exploration. It got me thinking, you know, as I was preparing these slides, I wonder, is the sermon dead? You know, sitting down for half an hour and or maybe listening to me for half an hour, sorry about that. You know, for these Gen Alphas, as they get a little bit older, actually, are we going to need to change what we do so that we can still be relevant to this next generation? They're health and safety conscious. I think a lot of that comes from growing up in the pandemic. Remember that? That was a little while ago now, wasn't it? Whether they are in an urban or rural context across Wales, they're growing up in an interconnected world. I've got family who live in New Zealand. And often, you know, they'll just ring me up. My nephews, they're 8 and 6 years old, and we'll have a little chat on WhatsApp as if we're in the same room. And that's just normal for them. Again, it blows my mind that I can have a conversation with somebody across the other side of the world and that there's no delay. I remember going on holiday as a little boy to France and my dad ringing home to say we've arrived safely. And the complication of having to dial a number and then wait and then dial another number and then wait and dial another number before you got through to somebody. And then there was a delay and we were only a couple of 100 miles away. But Gen Alpha are exposed from early on to multiple languages, to different cultures and different contexts. Like Gen Z and their shorter attention, high creativity, they've got this rapid information flow that they've got to learn to process quickly. But their media habits, I think, are shaping them to prefer that kind of immersive and visual learning styles, which I think are important for us as we look to serve them and to share the gospel with them. They're emotionally aware. I was speaking to a head teacher just recently in a primary school, and he was saying, it's amazing that even by age 5 and 6, they're able to label emotions that actually just 10 years ago, children who were 10 years old would struggle to do. And so they're learning their emotions a lot sooner than that. And again, that's great for us that we can have conversations with children who are a little bit younger. And yet they're spiritually open, but not yet defined. They're still in early childhood, most Gen Alpha. I think Gen Alpha finishes around about age 12 at the moment. But many are curious. They're imaginative about faith-based ideas, but deeply shaped by their parents' openness or lack of it to spirituality. And so that's just a little kind of brief overview of who Generation Alpha and who Generation Z are. And David Stillman actually wrote this. He's a generational expert and talking about both Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They've grown up in an always-on digital world, connected to everything, but often feeling disconnected from everyone. That was a really interesting quote. My oldest child, James, has just finished university. He was doing product and industrial design. I've still no idea what it is. But basically, one of his projects was this. He was studying in London, and he used to catch the tube into university, and he'd sit there with his earphones on, and everybody on the tube would do the same thing. And it might be the same for you if you catch the bus or the train or whatever it is to work. And he got thinking about this fact that everybody was sat there listening to music. So that shared experience of everyone on my carriage is listening to music. And so you've got that connectivity. Everyone's connected to Spotify or Apple Music, whatever your preference is. And yet, in that community together of everybody listening to music, everybody is completely separate. Now, contrast that to when I was a kid and we would watch TV on a Saturday night, like Gladiators or Knight Rider or whatever would be on. It was a family community experience. We'd all share the same thing. We'd all listen to the radio together, and it was a community thing. We were closer together. And so you've got community now, you've got community when I was a child, but it's very different. They're hyper-connected now, but yet completely separate. All of my children could be sat in the front room with us, maybe after dinner or whatever on a Sunday, and they're all on their phones, all doing the same thing, but they're all so different and so actually separated as well. So they're part of that connected, hyper-connected digital world, connected to everything, but yet disconnected from everyone. And that was James's project. He kind of created this thing where people could share music and work collaboratively and listen to the same thing. And it was a really good project. Talk to me afterwards if you're interested. But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting quote that kind of describes who our children are. And of course, Generation COVID, massive experience that so many of our young people and children experienced, and obviously we did as well, but it shaped their mindset and shaped their learning and their futures as well. I get the privilege of going into a local high school every week and working with the school there. They invite us in. It's not a Christian school, but they invite us in to go and pray there and to support the children through chaplaincy and assemblies and all of that kind of thing. And I was talking to a teacher just recently, and he said this. He said, the pandemic is over, but we're facing a worse epidemic now of anxiety and mental health. We're at a crisis point and there's not enough help. I don't know if that is your experience of working with children and young people in your context. Let me just tell you about this teacher. He's almost a brand new Christian. He's an art teacher, absolutely lovely guy. And every lunchtime he opens up his art room and children just flock in there. It's full of students every single day, not because he's got a fixed program of this is how it's going to help you with your anxiety and with your mental health, but actually it's just a safe space. It's somewhere they can go. They know that the teacher is there with a listening ear, and they know that, you know, they can go there, they can sit there with their headphones on, or they can chat. There's always biscuits. Biscuits are great, aren't they? But I thought it was so interesting, you know, even schools are under-resourced for what young people and students are experiencing. And we as a church, I imagine that, you know, like my church, your church feels under-resourced as well. But it doesn't take much to reach out to students who are crying out for just a safe space, somewhere where they can come, somewhere where they can just relax and be themselves. It's that authenticity, isn't it? It's that community that children and young people are crying out for. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to serve those students in our church context, but also if you're not involved in schools ministry, you know, people like this teacher are crying out for people like us as the church to go in and help them just care for children and young people in their care. The church then, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what is our response to all of this? So we know who Gen Z and Gen Alpha are. We know kind of what their traits are, what the kind of things that they're thinking about. We know some of the problems that they experience and what they would appreciate. So what are we doing then as the church in response to that? So this, I was on about that Scripture Union resource. This is put together by Mark Griffiths. And if you're in a Welsh language context here in Wales, this is really encouraging on the left-hand side. 11% of English medium children in Wales said they didn't believe in God, but it doubled when it came to Welsh medium children. You think, oh, well, that's not positive at all, is it? You know, twice as many Welsh language children don't believe in God as English. But actually, 39% of Welsh medium children attend church, as opposed to 11% of English medium children. I thought, what a great opportunity. You know, we've talked about the fact that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are spiritually curious. They're interested in things. And yet, you know, you've got this whole bunch of Welsh-speaking children who don't know and love Jesus, and yet they attend church every Sunday. So what a great opportunity. If you're in a Welsh context, then you know, that should really be encouraging for you. And I guess in an English language context as well, encouraging in a different way. You know, only 11% of English medium children said they didn't believe in God. I was like, okay, that's brilliant. So, you know, we can work with that. This is a quote here from the report as well. And this is an 11-year-old boy. They interviewed, I can't remember how many children it was, but I think a couple of thousand. And when they got the results from the stats, they sat down with the children and talked about kind of, you know, what percentage of children did or didn't believe in God. And this was a response of an 11-year-old boy. I think this is brilliant. Yeah, of course I believe in God. You know, you could just imagine the incredulity in his voice. I believe it would surprise you, but a lot of children don't talk about things like this. So he's going, yeah, I believe in God, but yeah, we don't talk about it. They don't talk about God and what they believe about him. We don't really hear a lot about him. That's a challenge for us, isn't it? These children going, yeah, of course I believe in God, but nobody's telling us about him. That's something that should concern us as church. Children think it's old-fashioned to talk about God. And I wonder if that kind of relates to what we've talked about how Gen Z and Gen Alpha learn. Am I going to go into school and stand up in front of a bunch of children and talk at them about my faith for half an hour, in which case they're going to switch off because it's old-fashioned? That's not how they learn. So we need to be presenting the gospel. We need to be presenting faith to these children in a relevant way that actually they can engage with. And some other kind of stats as well. So a YouGov poll that was done in conjunction with Barna. And those in Generation Z are more likely to believe in God than millennials. So I kind of, there's talk, isn't there, about, children these days, they don't believe in God or and so on. This is believe in a God, I should say that, rather than the Christian God, rather than Jehovah. So they're more likely to believe in a God than millennials. And again, encouraging, there's been an increase from 19% in 22 to 45% in 25 of those 18 to 24-year-olds, that's Gen Z, who believe that there is a God. So again, that's not saying that all of a sudden all of these people have become Christians. No, that's saying, no, there is something out there. We don't know what it is. The fields are ripe unto harvest, aren't they? There's a whole bunch of people out there who are going, yeah, believe in a God. Somebody tell me who he is. And that's a challenge for us as the church to respond to that in a real way. Britons are more likely to believe in God than they were a decade ago. And 82% of Gen Z identify as spiritual, whereas only 13% of them as atheists. When I was a kid, the issues that we had, with the Christian Union in my school was that people went, nah, I don't believe in God. God doesn't exist. I think atheism is dead now. There's all of these people, 82% of Gen Z identifying as spiritual. And now it's our job, as Christians, to be salt, to be light, and to share our faith boldly, and to say, look, you 82%, this is the answer. It's over here. It's Jesus. That should be our response as the church. Remember that boy, though, in that Scripture Union research. They're not automatically thinking or talking about God. So yeah, I believe in God, but not really kind of at the forefront of my mind. So how do we do that if, as we've said, Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't trust institutions? They're not going to just kind of go, oh yeah, the place where I go for answers is that really old-looking building over there. Or in my case, as my church, it looks like an old people's home from the 1960s. They're not going to walk in through that door and just go, right, tell me about God, because they don't trust institutions like that. So the importance for us as the church to go where people are, to go where these children and young people are, to go where these young adults are, and to share our faith in a context and in a way that actually matches their needs and the information that they're looking for, so that we can introduce them to faith. So our traditional methods may be of having, and again, my church still does this, we have a 10:30 service on Sunday. We expect people to come in through the doors. We'll tell them about Jesus. And sometimes it does happen. I've got a story, actually, I'm going to share in a little bit where that has happened for us. But that's not an automatic thing that happens. We need to be going into schools. We need to be going into public places and being able to share our faith, creating space outside of normal church buildings. And I thought this second thing was really interesting as well. This is again from the Barna research conducted by YouGov. 2 out of 3 non-Christian Gen Z said that they would consider going to church if invited by a friend. 65%. So if you invite 3 people to church as a Gen Zer, 2 of those people will more than likely turn up. Imagine if every single person who was that age group did that in our churches. We'd be in trouble in Rumney Chapel because we wouldn't have enough chairs. But are we empowering the Gen Z members of our church, and everybody actually, to share the gospel, to be invitational, to empower them and go, look, there's a world out there that is 83% describe themselves as spiritual, and 2 out of 3 of your friends will come to church if they are invited. It's exciting. And yet, sometimes we shrink back, don't we? And we go, oh no. Sorry, go on.
I'm just going to add to that. You were saying earlier that they're growing up in a very different environment from what we grew up. If we've grown up in the church, quite often the way we equip our young people is projecting our narrative of what it was like sharing our faith 10, 20 years ago, which was a scary thing, and up against lots of opposition. Whereas actually, if we change that narrative and show them the opportunities and that it's not the same as what we had growing up, then that could really embolden them and embolden us as
Absolutely. I mean, a great example of that, my daughter Katie, is the third time I've referred to her, but her and her friend Grace, they've got some friends in school who don't go to church. They're not their families aren't church families at all, and Katie and Grace decided that they would invite them to Costa Coffee every Tuesday and have a Bible study. I was like, when I was Katie's age, if I turned around to somebody and went, do you want to come to a Bible study in a coffee shop? I mean, again, coffee shops didn't exist. But they would have just laughed me out. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, every Tuesday, without fail, these two girls and Katie and Grace turn up and read the Bible together in Costa Coffee. It costs me an arm and a leg. But the other day, like Katie would, she'd pack up her bag and she'd have her 3 Bibles in there, 1 for her and 2 for her friends. And the other day she said to me, she said, Dad, can I use some of my pocket money and go and buy some Bibles for these girls? And I was like, we've got some in the church, you can have them, it's fine. And so she gave them to me. And then one of the parents of the girls messaged me and was like, oh, thanks so much for this Bible. Like, how much do we owe you? And I'm like, no, it's free. It's from Rumney Chapel. And how wonderful is that, And if I'd have turned around to my daughter, as you said, and gone, oh, it might be a struggle. They might say, that would discourage her from it. But they're doing it. And they've created this community where they're reading the Bible together, where they're supporting each other kind of with their mental health and with, all of that kind of stuff as well. And they're reading the Bible, and it's such a blessing. Now, they haven't turned up at church yet, but I'm convinced that they will do. So yeah, empowering our young people to do that and not putting our narrative on, oh, when I was a kid, I got beaten up actually when I was in school for being a Christian. That's not going to happen to my children. They might be mocked still, but it's exciting where they're at. So creating that environment and encouraging Gen Alpha and Gen Z to share their faith, and we're going to see some amazing results for that. We've got a boy in my church, and his name is Cam. And Cam, about a year ago, kind of walked in on a Sunday morning and went, oh, I thought I'd come and find out what's going on in church. He'd come to our kids club for a couple of years before that. He's now, how old's Cam? 12, 13 years old. And all of a sudden, before we realised, he was at everything. He was there Sunday mornings. He was helping out in our kids club. If ever we had an event on, Cam would be there, and he just couldn't get rid of him. Like, he'd just walk past the church on a 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon and bang on the door until somebody let him in and be like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I was just passing." And a couple of months ago, my van, my Faith Space van, which is a great resource you should definitely book, broke down. And so Cam and a guy, one of my intern, came and rescued me, and they sat in the cab of the van while I went to go and get some jump leads. And whilst they were there, Caleb just turned around and said to Cam, "Cam, why are you always here? What is it? Like, do you not have anything else to do with your life?" He's American, he could get away with being rude. And Cam said this, he said, "It just feels like home." Cam's home life isn't the best, He said, "It just feels like home." And then Caleb chatted to him and he said, "Well, look, you know what we believe about Jesus." And he shared the gospel with him. And he said, "Cam, what do you believe about Jesus?" And Cam was like, "Yeah, all of that. I've believed it for the last year." And it was such an encouraging thing for us. And so we sat down with Caleb and Cam, and we're like, right, what do we do about this, about Cam? Like, he needs to be discipled. He needs that community. And so we said to him, well, we'd love to start like a young lads small group. We have done. It's called Eastside. And Cam went, "Yeah, no worries." He said, "Shall I invite my friends?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." 6 of them. 6 of them now meet with us every other Sunday evening. Me and my son run it. Caleb's gone back to America. And all of them now would say this about the church. We've been able to create this community. I would never have said to a young person kind of 10, maybe 15 years ago, yeah, invite all your friends along to a Bible study. And yet Cam and Katie and all of these people are going, yeah, it feels at home. This is just natural for us to be able to share our faith. And things like that are happening. I know Peter shared, didn't he, about that girl who'd just been listening to the book of Luke being read online on TikTok, and she turns up and she's now baptized. You know, it's happening. The quiet revival, the not so quiet revival, actually, it is happening. But the challenge is this: are we ready for change? Are we ready to change the things that we do, the style that we do things in, the narratives that we're sharing, to our young people about sharing faith and what to expect and all of these things? Are we ready for change? I used to work for an organization called the Message Trust, and the CEO of that, his name's Andy Hawthorne, and he tells a story of many years ago, actually. There was a church that was in place called Wythenshawe, and for 15 years they've been praying for young people to come in through the doors. And so when Andy started the Worldwide Message Tribe, they did a big mission in Wythenshawe, and hundreds of young people came along and responded to the gospel on the Friday night after a week of schools mission. And Andy stood on the stage and he said, you all need to get plugged into a local church. And so he said, this is the church that we recommend you go into. They've been praying for young people for years. And so Sunday morning, over 150 young people turned up at this church. And he said they had dogs and skateboards and everything else. You know, it was absolute chaos. And they did the church service, or tried to anyway, and all the young people went home, and the church kind of sat there a bit shell-shocked. I'm like, what do we do? What do we do about this? And so what they decided to do was the following Sunday, they'd meet an hour earlier, and so they could finish in time, lock the doors and go home before any of the young people turned up. True story. Absolute true story. Because although they'd been praying for these young people for so long, they were so scared when they turned up that it was going to change everything that they were doing, that it was chaotic, and working with young people is always chaotic, that they didn't know what to do about it because they just weren't ready. Are we ready for change? Are we investing in our young people? We don't want to be like that church. The good news about that story, by the way, is that church then went back to the Message and said, you've got to help us with this. We don't know what we're doing. And they started this amazing thing called Eden. And now that church is like over 1,000 people. It's incredible. But we've got to be ready. We've got to be ready to change our attitudes, to change our styles. We've got to be ready to learn from these Gen Z and Gen Alpha young people. We can't be just too busy doing church, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. You know, there's proof that Generation Z church attendance is on the rise. Look at this. For men, between 2018 and 2024, the percentage of young men attending church has gone up from 4% to 21%. Cam in my church and his 5 friends are proof of that. It's happening. You might not see it yet in your church, but are you ready for it when it happens? Are you investing in your young people? Are you investing in the people who are working with your young people? If not, sign up for gym. You should definitely do that. Last 2 slides from me. This was last night. This was the Friday night before. In Cardiff and in Swansea, I know some of you were actually there at these events. We had 500 plus young people and their leaders at something called Youth Nights. 3 things about Youth Nights. It's about worship, it's about prayer, and it's about testimony. And every Youth Nights for the last 2.5 years, I have bawled my eyes out, because God is doing an amazing thing in these young people's lives. Are we ready for that? There was a girl stood up last night in Swansea and shared a testimony of how God is working in her life. And the youth leaders from her church went, we had no idea that this was happening. How exciting is that? That God is doing a whole bunch of stuff that we don't even know that he's doing. So let's trust God as we serve our young people. You know, the church's mandate hasn't changed for 2,000 years. Surely, I mean, you know this, the Great Commission, don't you? You know it. Go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. That's what we're doing, isn't it, in our youth ministry, in our churches. We're doing that, whether it's local or whether it's national or whether it's international, whatever it is. But I sometimes, when I used to read these verses, I'd be like, I have to do all of that. To go into all the world, like that's a massive responsibility. I'm not equipped to do that. But somebody said this, you know, therefore, my grandmother used to say, what's the therefore? And it's this. Jesus says, all authority has been given, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. We are Christ's ambassadors in this. We're not going into our schools and into our churches and into our communities with our own authority. We're not going in with our own message. We are going in as Christ's ambassadors. And we have got a message that changes lives. We've got a message that changes futures. We've got a message that brings hope. And we should not be discouraged. No matter what context we're working with, no matter the fact that our styles have changed from when me as a 48-year-old man, kind of when I was in school, it's all different now. That's okay. God gives us what we need. He equips us to do what he's called us to do. And when we go with the authority of Jesus. We're not just going, oh, we've got a message we want to share. We're going, no. We're Christ's ambassadors in this. We should be encouraged as we go and serve our Gen Z and our Gen Alpha, as we make disciples, as they flock to Jesus, as they start believing in not just a God, not just calling themselves spiritual, but actually as we shout loudly from the rooftops, look, we have a message of hope, and his name is Jesus. Yeah, okay, well, I'm in for that. I've got the authority of Jesus, but little old me by myself doing that in a school week in, week out. We forget this bit. I am with you always to the end of the age. So Jesus says, go. He says, not in your own authority, but actually go with my authority. Oh, and by the way, I'm coming with you too. And I'm so encouraged as I read this. This is up on my office wall in big, bold letters. That we go with the most important message that anybody has ever heard. We go with Christ's authority, and he comes with us as well. And that should fill us with hope. You know, whatever context we're working with, whatever the age group, whether we're still doing youth ministry when there's, I don't know what comes after beta. I have no idea. Gamma, is it? I don't know. Whatever generations we're going to work with in 20 years' time, this message is still relevant. Our methods change, but our message never does. And I want to encourage you in the work that you're doing with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, that this will always be the command to the church to the very end of the age. Thank you so much for listening. I was going to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, but we've got a few minutes if anybody's got any questions that they wanted to ask. I'm not the expert. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it out for you and get back to you. But yes, has anyone got any comments or questions from what I've said this morning? Yes.
I have heard this quiet revival, those figures. It's also factoring in immigrants or Christian who are coming in, or say, for example, many Iranians coming to faith. So I think that's quite interesting. It's not just native British people, but those numbers are slightly being affected by Christian immigrants into the country.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the state of churches across Wales, at the churches that are declining and the churches that are growing, it tends to be the kind of more traditional denominations which are declining, and then kind of newer churches and more charismatic churches and so on, which are increasing, which tend to be, if you've got an immigrant who comes into the UK, actually that's the kind of church that they normally engage with. So yeah, that is definitely affecting the figures. It's not my experience. You know, all of the 6 lads that we've got who've come are all white Welsh young men, but we do have 30% of our church is Nigerian. So yeah, thank you very much. 5 minutes, everyone. You can either finish early and go and have a cup of coffee, or you can ask another question. Yes?
Whenever you say about our method changing and you gave the 30-minute sermon as an example, could you give us a flavour of what you might envision that looking like, doing it differently?
I used to love Saturday morning TV when I was a kid. I don't know if that was your thing. It was the only thing that you could watch. You couldn't flick through all the channels, could you? It was Philip Schofield or whatever on BBC One. But what I loved about it was that no segment was more than 5 minutes long. And so it'd all be related, you know, all the way through the morning, but everything was different. It was fast-paced, and there'd be different kind of phone-ins or interviews or somebody being gunged. I'm not saying we gunge people in church. But that's certainly my model for doing youth and children's ministry, is to keep it fast-paced, to keep different kind of learning styles in there. You know, I struggle to focus for more than 10 minutes listening to someone. I'm really pleased none of you have fallen asleep this morning. But yeah, to kind of keep it changing. One of my friends the other Sunday in his Sunday service did an interactive poll, so on something called Mentimeter, which is great. You can put it up on the screen and give people a code, and you can have an interactive kind of discussion. People can send in questions and whatever, just to have that kind of interaction rather than somebody standing at the front and then talking for 50 minutes like I've just done. So to kind of keep it interactive, keep it shorter, and that's the kind of thing that I would suggest. Yes.
I think it's important to remember that prayer is key as well, and like encouraging the whole church to be involved in praying for the children and young people in the area, and kind of that it is a whole church approach and not just down to the youth worker or the youth team.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting the whole church invested, I think is.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you know, we do fall into that thing sometimes as well as churches, talking about whole church ministry of, oh, youth workers have got to be young and hip and, you know, all that kind of thing. Our newest youth worker in our church is 74 years old, and Jo, she's from the East End of London, doesn't take no nonsense from anyone, but she's brilliant. She's loving it, and the young people are flocking to her, because Nana Jo, they call her. So it's not about age, it's about attitude, isn't it? You know, she hasn't got a clue on how to use an iPad, but she'll sit down and have a cup of tea and make them a cake and that kind of stuff, and they love it. They absolutely love it. It's about building relationship. Anyone? Yes.
The impression I've got with sort of flicking through some of the Choir Revival report stuff is that there's a hunger for the Bible and for something of substance, and they don't want the fluff. They just want the meat.
Yeah.
How can we engage with young people and give them the meat in a way that's
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Wow. Well, we've got a meaty question, so. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because if we're saying in one way, right, we have to go out of our church buildings and meet young people where they're at, actually then being able to sit down with them and say, right, let's do a Bible study on this particular thing is difficult. Online ministry is great for that. So we use WhatsApp in my church. So we always obviously make sure that there's adults in the conversation, DBS adults, blah, 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 checked, with young people. And so, you know, we encourage our young people to read a couple of verses a day and kind of post their comments in that. So we do that with our Eastside small group and also with the girls group that we've got going on as well. So it carries the conversation on. So it's not just come to us for an hour. This is like something that you can do in your own time, whether you're on the bus on the way to school or, you know, when you wake up in the morning. So just to kind of make it part of their ordinary everyday lives rather than this is what I do for an hour on Sunday. And we find that they really engage with that. And then when we do meet together, we talk through kind of all the comments and so on. And that's really helpful for us. I mean, with the Eastside guys group that we've got, they're all 14, 15-year-old boys. So we played gross drink ping pong with them, like, you know, beer pong, but we had gross drinks. And so they love doing that. But then we talked all around, you know, the targets that we set for ourselves and expectations and whatever. And actually we played that kind of beer pong game for 10 minutes and we talked about the Bible for an hour. And we went over time. It was like, oh, guys, we're finishing now. And they went, oh, no. They still wanted to carry on. So on their terms, that was great. But yeah, that is what's happening. It's not just the fluff. It's actually getting into the deeper stuff as well. Alpha is just doing incredible things in Wales at the moment. Alpha Youth in particular, Phoebe, who runs that, she's based down in Swansea, but there's an explosion of Alpha groups led by young people. So there's a girl called Carrie who I met recently, and she ran Alpha in her college, and she's led a whole bunch of her college friends. And they, again, you know, it's youth-led, and it's exciting. You know, we need to be there to cheer them on with that. Yeah. 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 They've. Yeah. And really visual, both of them are, aren't they? You know, they're really appealing for young people and young adults. So. Somebody put their hand up over here. Yes, Phil.
I take the point that we've got to change our methods. But how do you manage the change in a more traditional church where if you went full-scale interactive 10-minute bites, you'd lose the 40 plus year, 40 old.
Yeah.
Do you have two separate types of services?
I'm a bit maverick with this. I think I would sit down with the older people in the church and go, look, this is where we're at. This is what we need to do. And harshly, I'd say it in a loving way, but you're old enough to feed yourselves. You know, we need to, if we want this church to be here in 20 years' time, 10 years' time, we need to be caring for and working with these young people. And it's about then encouraging those 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds to be praying for and investing in the kind of younger generations as well. And I'm not saying out with the old and in with the new. And, you know, I come from a traditional kind of church myself. You need to provide kind of activities for all age groups, don't you? And it might be that, yeah, you have two different styles of services, or, you know, and you might find that one kind of is successful and one's not, or whatever, but it's being flexible. I think one of the things, so my church, just for a bit of context, we were 20, 25 people, we're now 125 people on a Sunday morning, and we grew through the pandemic for that from 2020 through to today. And it was that moment in the pandemic where every public thing was closed, we were all on, or some of us were on furlough anyway, and I was sat there kind of in my back garden at 2:00 in the morning going, what am I doing? Like, what's God saying in all of this? And somebody messaged me, they were also up at 2 in the morning, and they were like, what are you looking forward to not restarting after the pandemic is finished? I thought, what a weird question, but actually it was so freeing, because we'd been doing some stuff for the same way since we launched in 1928, actually. We were still doing the same services that we were doing back then. And like that whole kind of thing of my stereo cassette player, there's no way I'd consider giving one of those to my children these days. And that was only from 1988. So why are we still doing stuff that actually from 60 years before that was relevant, but now is not? And so we've got I think as a church, we've got a real challenge to kind of go, why are we doing these things? Actually, if we had to stop everything now, what would we not restart? And that pandemic kind of freedom that we had as a church was, right, we're going to try that. Oh, no, that hasn't worked. We'll stop that. We'll try that. No, that hasn't worked. Oh, this is what's working for us. And because of the chaos of those couple of years, we were able to kind of find a way through it and say, actually, this works really well for us. And it's very different from what we used to do before. And so having permission to try something to fail and to try again and fail and find that kind of path that works for us as a church, I think that's really helped us in our growth and attitude towards kind of Gen Z, Gen Alpha and the future of the church. So it's a challenging conversation. Of course we have people who are very unhappy about things changing and so on. I don't like change. I'm not that old. But it's necessary, isn't it, for the future of the church? Anyone else? Yes. Last question, then we can all have a comfort break.
Maybe comments and maybe question. We've been talking about change, and actually referring to your slide when you stated if we were ready for change. And what has been bothering me personally is the fact that though the method should change, but the message must not change.
Yeah.
And I've realized that when you see young people, even sometimes when they come to church, they want to choose to hear what they feel like they should hear, not necessarily the message of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges we face is the fact that actually the message of the gospel faithfully preached that changes life. There's no way, even if your method is different, that content, that message must not change.
Yeah.
And so how do we ensure that we still preach the message of the gospel, that Christ came, he died for our sins, and that Christ is the only way to heaven. He came to give us a new life, and is the only way for us to actually have a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Still making sure that message does not change, even if the method will change.
Yeah. I think that's so key. I think I said right at the very beginning, talking about Gen Z, about what they're passionate about. It's things like racial justice, climate change, mental health, gender identity, gender equality, all of that kind of stuff. And fine, if young people want to come to the youth setting I'm involved with and talk about those things, I would always kind of then point them back to the gospel and go, right, identity. Your identity isn't in your gender or your sex. Actually, your identity is in, you're a child of God. And this is where you find identity. If you want to talk about equality, what was Jesus's attitude towards women? What is the purpose of humankind? And all of those messages, even if you're talking about the things that the young people want to talk about, you can always go back to the gospel with that. It's not how we would have done things when I was young. Like I remember sat in a gospel meeting in my church and the preacher would always talk about double-decker buses running people over after the service is finished and where would you end up if that happened to you. I'm not going to say that to my young people these days. I was terrified of buses for years. But if we're talking about kind of mental health, where do you find peace? Well, who's the Prince of Peace? It's Jesus. Let me tell you about Jesus. So I think actually all of these things that young people, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, are concerned about these days, like we'll talk about them till the cows come home, but it'll always go back to Jesus because that's where the answers are found. Our hope, our peace, our future, our now is found in Jesus. And we need to not be ashamed of that, because if young people are open to it, we need to be bolder than ever in sharing the gospel. But it's a challenge, isn't it? You can kind of, you can steer off and go, right, we're going to talk about justice and equality and all of that kind of stuff, and then forget about the gospel. I think, you know, that you've got a bunch of people then who are, you know, feel loved and equal and, you know, all of this kind of stuff, but they're still going to hell. Well, that's no good, you know. If you run a food bank, you can feed people's stomachs, but you still need to tell them about Jesus. And it's the same with young people as well. The message never changes, but the mission always does to stay relevant, because we don't want to be giving cassette players out in 2025 to our young people, even though I still think they're cool. Cool. Thank you all so much for listening to my rambling. If you want to talk to me, I'm going to be around for the rest of the afternoon. The gym stand is over there as well, Growing Youth Ministry. There's pencil cases. Go and grab one if you're involved in youth ministry or somebody from your church would appreciate the training. But yeah, thank you for your time, everyone.